Hey guys, it's Chris at Highline Guitars, and you're watching another episode of From the Luthier's Workbench. If you like to build or repair guitars, I suggest you click that subscribe button down below, and you'll become part of a community of fellow luthiers. And together, we can take your skills to a whole new level. If you'd like to support my guitar building YouTube channel, visit eguitarplans.com and buy a plan. A link is in the description below. Now on with the video. In this episode, I'm going to be covering part 19 of the Highline Echo laminated top guitar build. And that means I'm going to be installing pickups and electronics. So let's jump in and get started. So now I'm ready to install the pots and the switch into the control cavity. However, there's something that I did the other day that I forgot to video, and I want to explain that now because you can no doubt see what I've done here. And what I did was, in order to kind of reinforce the top, it's pretty thin, but it is maple, so I'm confident that I wouldn't have any issues, but just to play it safe, what I did is I mixed up some 30-minute epoxy and I spread it out on the inside top of the, or under the top of the cavity here. And once I had it laid out nice and even, I took a piece of fiberglass cloth that was cut to the shape of the cavity, just slightly larger. And then I pressed it down into the wet epoxy, got it thoroughly saturated, and applied a little bit more to the top, and then let that dry. And that leaves a really hard, reinforced layer underneath the maple. So that should protect it. But what I want to do before I install the controls is I want to paint the inside of the cavity with just some regular craft store acrylic black paint, nothing fancy. And that way it'll just kind of dress it up a little bit and make the inside look a little nicer. So that's what I'm going to do right now. I'll probably do a couple of coats. And then after applying the flat black finish, I'm going to brush in a little bit of Crystal Lac Bright Tone Matte just to seal it and protect it. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to install the jack. And the type of jack I'm using is a panel jack. These are often found on acoustic guitars. They're also used on amplifiers. And the reason I'm using this type of jack is because the body is too thin around the edge to support a jack plate. Now I suppose I could use like a football jack plate, but I decided just to go ahead and use the panel jack. And that is held in place with a washer and a nut. And these are kind of a challenge because of the confined spaces here that I have to work in. So it takes a little bit of fiddling and usually a special wrench to tighten it down. Sometimes I'll use some needle nose pliers. And then once I have it tight, or close to being tight, I'll add a little bit of thread lock and then give it that last little bit of tightness to it. All right, so now what I'm going to do is put a washer on each of the pots and a nut. And I'll just finger tighten these for now. Later on, before I put the knobs on, I'll give it a final tighten down. Sometimes these nuts are a little fiddly to work with. Then what I've done here is I have brought all my ground connections together, and I'm going to tin this and then solder it to the back of this pot, and that will ground all the electronics. Now another thing I'm doing is I am putting a small length of heat shrink onto the shielded wire that comes out of the signal cable. And that will help to prevent that from touching any of the signal wires or anything that they shouldn't be touching. So what I'm doing now is I'm putting a great big blob of solder on the back of this pot. And then I'm going to solder my ground connections to the back. Then I'll just shrink that heat shrink tubing down. Now the fiddliest part here is going to be trying to get the signal wire from the switch into the front of the pot. And I think the best way and the safest way to do it is going to be to remove that pot, or at least partially, so that I can actually get to it. Because that wire is kind of buried in here. Just going to kind of move some of these out of the way. There we go. All right, so now what I can do is flip this over, And I'm going to tighten the nuts here. And I will hold the back of the pot while I use this spanner wrench to tighten it down. And then I use one of these special switch nut tightening wrenches. There. All right, so now what I'm going to do is install the pickups. And I have the pickups installed into the rings already, so I can just slide the wiring in. It's a little bit tight in that control cavity with all the wiring and the limited amount of space that I have. Then I am going to use a drill to drill the holes for the screws. All right, so now I'm going to solder the pickups to the three-way switch, and the wiring that I use is 4-conductor wiring, and I've got my signal wire, my series connection here. When I solder these two together, the two bobbins are connected in series, and then my ground. So what I want to do is put some heat shrink tubing onto the series connection so that it doesn't short by, touching any of the grounded components. And then what I like to do is figure out when the switch is in the three different positions, what that's going to mean as far as which pickup will be activated. So the switch, the way I have it, it goes back and forth. So when it's back, I want the bridge pickup selected. That means I have to solder onto when I'm looking at the back, the left lug of the switch. So I've already tinned the wire and the connection, and then the ground wire has to be connected to a grounded surface, which in this case is going to be the back of the tone pot. So what I usually will do is just sort of touch it to heat up some of the solder, and that will help it stick. Then I'm going to do the same thing to the neck pickup. First I'm going to put on some heat shrink tubing, shrink it down, and then I like to snip off any excess wire because I like to keep these connections pretty clean. All right, now I'll just solder the ground wire to the back of this pot. Okay, so all of the wiring is now complete. So what I can do now is close up the cavity. And of course I can't forget the knobs, and I'm using metal chrome knurled dome shafts that have a set screw. So that'll hold it firmly to the solid shaft of the pot. So there we go. Even though I don't have the guitar strung up yet, I can still plug it in and check to make sure that the wiring works correctly. Okay, well that's all the time I've got for this episode. In the next episode, I'm going to continue with the final assembly, and that's going to include installing the tuners and then probably making the nut so that I can string this bad boy up and do the setup and start testing it out. So we'll see how far I can get. Not really sure. It's always sort of a play it by ear and see what happens kind of thing. So in the meantime, if you've got any comments or questions, post them down below. If you don't subscribe to this channel and really enjoy watching videos on building guitars, click the subscribe button, and of course hit that bell for notification every time I post up a new video, which is about twice a week. And as always, take care, stay safe, keep testing negative, and I'll see you soon.